The old pickup truck, packed to the brim with everything we owned, rattled down the gravel road. Dust rose behind us, a red cloud against the endless blue of the Iowa sky. Sarah had her hand resting on my knee, a silent reassurance. In the back, Lily, our 8-year-old, was humming a tuneless song, while Tom, 12 and perpetually unimpressed, stared out the window, headphones clamped over his ears. This was it, our new life. We'd left the city behind, the constant noise, the crushing deadlines, the feeling of being perpetually behind. Sarah, a graphic designer, had found herself staring at a blank screen for hours, the creativity drained out of her. I, a software engineer, felt the walls of my cubicle closing in, the endless lines of code blurring into a meaningless haze. We needed a change, a drastic one. And when we saw the listing for the old farmstead in rural Iowa, something just clicked. It wasn't perfect. The farmhouse was a century old with peeling paint and a porch that sagged precariously. The barn leaned like a tired old man, and the fields, though vast, were overgrown with weeds. But there was a quiet beauty to it, a sense of history and resilience. The air smelled clean, of rich earth and distant rain. The silence was profound, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the rustle of cornfields in the breeze. It was a blank canvas, a place where we could breathe again, where our kids could run free. "Almost there," Sarah said, her voice soft, a hint of excitement in it. She pointed to a barely visible track leading off the main road. "That's our turn." I slowed the truck, the tires crunching on the loose stones as we turned onto a narrower, even more overgrown lane. Trees, thick with summer foliage, formed a tunnel overhead, dappling the sunlight. The sense of isolation deepened, but it wasn't a frightening isolation. It was a comforting one, a feeling of being truly away from it all. After a few minutes, the trees opened up, and there it was. The farmhouse, standing proud despite its age, framed by towering oak trees. A wide, open field stretched out behind it, leading to a distant line of woods. It was exactly as we'd imagined, perhaps even better. The air hummed with the promise of a new beginning. Lily gasped, pointing. "Look, a swing set." Tucked under one of the oaks, a rusty metal swing set stood, a relic from a previous family. Tom even cracked a small smile, pulling off his headphones for a moment. We parked the truck and just stood there for a while, taking it all in. The silence was immense, a living thing. It wasn't empty, it was full of the sounds of nature, the buzzing of insects, the distant call of a bird. It was a different kind of symphony than the city's endless roar, and it was exactly what we needed. "Welcome home," Sarah whispered, squeezing my hand. Her eyes, usually tired and strained, were bright with a renewed hope. I felt it too, a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in years. This farm, this quiet corner of Iowa, was going to be our sanctuary, our fresh start. We had no idea then what else it held. The sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The shadows lengthened, stretching across the fields. A cool breeze rustled the leaves in the old oaks, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something else, something faint and indefinable, like old stone in deep water. It was a subtle note in the symphony of the evening, easily dismissed. But it was there, and it was waiting. The first few days on the farm were a whirlwind of unpacking and exploration. The kids, freed from the confines of city apartments, ran wild, their laughter echoing across the fields. Lily claimed the rusty swing set as her personal kingdom, while Tom, ever the adventurer, began mapping out the property, armed with a compass and a newfound sense of purpose. Sarah and I tackled the house, peeling back layers of old wallpaper, scrubbing away decades of grime, and dreaming of the life we would build here. One afternoon, while Tom was off exploring the far reaches of the property, he burst back into the house, breathless and excited. "Dad, Mom, you won't believe what I found. It's like something from a movie." His enthusiasm was infectious. We followed him, Lily trailing behind, her curiosity piqued. He led us past the dilapidated barn, its weathered wood groaning softly in the breeze, and deeper into a neglected corner of the property. The grass here was taller, thicker, and thorny bushes clawed at our clothes as we pushed through. The air grew cooler, and the light seemed to dim, even though the sun was still high in the sky. And then we saw it. Tucked away, almost swallowed by the overgrown foliage, was an old well. It wasn't the kind with a picturesque wooden bucket and rope. This was ancient, built from rough-hewn stones, dark with age and moss. The circular opening was covered by a heavy, rusted iron grate secured with thick, corroded bolts. It looked like something pulled from a forgotten fairy tale, Or perhaps a forgotten nightmare. Whoa, I breathed, stepping closer. The stones were cold to the touch, even on a warm summer day. A faint, earthy smell, like damp rock and deep soil, emanated from beneath the grate. It was a smell that spoke of immense depth, of secrets buried long ago. Sarah ran her hand over the rough stone. It's beautiful, in a creepy sort of way. I wonder how old it is. Tom, ever practical, tried to peer through the grate. Think there's still water down there? We could use it for the garden. Lily, however, hung back, clutching Sarah's leg. Her usual boundless energy seemed to have drained away. Her eyes, wide and a little fearful, were fixed on the well. It's dark, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I knelt down, trying to see past the rust and the shadows. The darkness beneath the grate was absolute, a void that seemed to swallow the light. I felt a strange, inexplicable chill, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. It wasn't the cold of the stone, it was something else. A feeling of immense age, of something dormant but not entirely asleep. Just an old well, sweetie, Sarah said, trying to reassure Lily, though her own voice held a slight tremor. Probably dried up years ago. But as I stood there, looking into that ancient darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just an old well. It felt like a forgotten eye, slowly opening, watching us. The air around it was still unnaturally so, as if even the wind held its breath in its presence. We had found a piece of the farm's history, a hidden corner that felt both intriguing and deeply unsettling. We had no idea how deeply it would soon reach into our lives. Life on the farm quickly settled into a rhythm. Days were filled with the satisfying ache of physical labor, clearing overgrown paths, mending fences, coaxing life back into the neglected garden. Evenings were for tired laughter, simple meals, and the quiet comfort of family. The well, for a time, became just another feature of the landscape, a curious relic of the past. We talked about eventually clearing the brush around it, maybe even restoring it, but there was always something more pressing to do. Then came the first full moon. It was a night of breathtaking clarity. The sky was a vast inky canvas, dusted with a million stars, and the moon hung low and heavy, a luminous pearl casting long, stark shadows across the fields. The air was still, unusually so for Iowa, with not a breath of wind to stir the leaves. The kids were asleep, exhausted from a day of running and playing. Sarah was inside, reading by the soft glow of a lamp. I found myself drawn outside, a mug of lukewarm coffee in my hand. The silence was profound, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in my bones. It was the kind of silence that makes you feel small, insignificant, but also deeply connected to something ancient and vast. I walked across the dew-kissed grass, drawn by an invisible thread, until I found myself standing near the old well. The moonlight bathed it in an ethereal glow, highlighting the rough texture of the stones, making the rusted grate gleam with a faint metallic sheen. It looked different in this light, less like a forgotten relic and more like a watchful eye, open to the vastness of the night sky. I stood a few feet away, my heart a dull thrum against my ribs, listening. At first, there was nothing. Just the vast, oppressive silence of the Iowa night. I almost turned to go back inside, to dismiss it all as a trick of the light, a product of my own overactive imagination. But then, it began. Not a whisper, not a murmur, but a sound that seemed to form directly inside my head. It was a whisper, a soft, sibilant murmur, like dry leaves skittering across stone. It seemed to emanate from beneath the grate, a breath from the deep. I leaned closer, straining my ears. The sound was elusive, just at the edge of audibility. It wasn't words, not exactly. More like a collection of sounds, a jumble of sighs and rustles and faint, almost musical tones. It was rhythmic, though, a subtle ebb and flow that seemed to match the slow, steady beat of my own heart. I told myself it was the wind. The farm was old, full of drafts and creaks. The well, being a deep shaft, would naturally create its own air currents. It was just the acoustics of the place, playing tricks on my tired mind. I was isolated out here, and the silence could be deceptive, filling itself with imagined sounds. I even tried to rationalize it further. Perhaps it was the sound of water deep below, shifting or dripping. The well was old, but it might not be entirely dry. The thought was strangely comforting, a natural explanation, a logical one. But even as I tried to convince myself, a prickle of unease crawled up my spine. The air around the well felt colder, denser, as if the sound was drawing the warmth out of the night. The faint, briny smell I'd noticed on our first visit seemed stronger now, a taste of salt and decay on my tongue. And the rhythm, it was too deliberate, too consistent to be random. It felt like a pulse, a slow, ancient pulse beating from the heart of the earth. I stayed there for another 10 minutes listening, trying to catch a clearer fragment, a recognizable word. But it remained just beyond my grasp, a tantalizing, unsettling murmur. Finally, the chill in the air, or perhaps the chill in my soul, drove me back inside. I left the well bathed in moonlight, its whispers fading behind me, swallowed by the vast silence of the Iowa night. I told myself it was nothing, just the farm settling, just my imagination. But as I lay in bed, the image of the moonlit well burned behind my eyelids, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had stirred in the darkness below. Something that had been listening, and now it had spoken. Days turned into weeks, and the initial flurry of activity on the farm began to settle into a comfortable routine. The kids started their new schools in the nearby town, adapting with surprising ease. Sarah found a quiet corner in the old farmhouse to set up her design studio, and the creative spark, long dormant, slowly began to flicker back to life. I spent my mornings tending to the small vegetable patch we'd started, and my afternoons diving back into coding. The quiet of the farm a welcome balm to my previously frazzled nerves. The well, for a time, receded into the background. The full moon had passed, and with it, the faint whispers. I told myself I had imagined them, a product of exhaustion in the unfamiliar silence of the countryside. It was easy to believe that during the bright, busy hours of the day, surrounded by the sounds of family and the satisfying hum of productive work, the sun was a powerful disinfectant for strange thoughts. Yet, a subtle shift had occurred. I found myself, almost unconsciously, gravitating towards the well. When I took a break from coding, my feet would often lead me down the path past the barn, towards that overgrown corner of the property. I wouldn't necessarily approach it, sometimes just standing at a distance, watching it, feeling its presence. It was like an old, familiar landmark, the one that now held a new, unsettling significance. The air around it still felt different, a fraction cooler, a fraction heavier, even in the midday sun. Sarah noticed. She was perceptive, always had been. One afternoon, she found me standing by the kitchen window, staring out towards the well, lost in thought. "Everything all right, Alex?" she asked, her voice gentle. "You seem a little distant lately. And you're spending a lot of time out by that old well." I shrugged, trying to appear casual. "Just thinking about how to clear out that brush. It's a real mess back there." It was a half-truth. I was thinking about the brush, but also about the darkness it concealed, and the faint, almost imperceptible pull it exerted on me. She didn't press, but her eyes lingered on me for a moment longer than usual, a flicker of concern in their depths. She knew me too well. She knew when I was holding something back. The unspoken question hung in the air between us, a subtle tension that hadn't been there before. Even when I wasn't near the well, I felt its lingering echo. A faint, almost subliminal hum seemed to resonate in the quiet moments, when the house was still, or when I was alone in my office. It was like a low-frequency vibration just beneath the threshold of hearing, a persistent background noise that my mind couldn't quite filter out. It wasn't frightening, not yet. More like a persistent itch, a subtle reminder of something unseen, something waiting. The kids, too, seemed to have an unspoken awareness of it. Lily, who had initially been fearful, now avoided that corner of the property altogether, preferring to play closer to the house. Tom, while still adventurous, never ventured near the well during his explorations. It was as if an invisible boundary had been drawn, a silent agreement among us to leave that particular relic undisturbed. But the next full moon was approaching. I could feel it in the lengthening shadows, in the subtle shift of the air, in the way the nights grew colder. And with it, I knew the whispers would return. I tried to push the thought away, to focus on the mundane tasks of farm life, on the comforting normalcy of our new routine. But the well was there, a silent, ancient presence, waiting. And I knew, with a growing sense of dread, that it wouldn't be so easily dismissed this time. The second full moon on the farm arrived with a quiet inevitability. The sky was a bruised purple as dusk settled, and a heavy, humid air hung low, promising a storm that never quite broke. The moon, when it finally rose, was a swollen, sickly yellow, peering through a thin veil of clouds. It cast an eerie, diffused light across the fields, turning the familiar landscape into something alien and unsettling. I had tried to ignore it all day, burying myself in work, in the comforting logic of code. But the subtle shift in the atmosphere, the way the shadows seemed to deepen and cling, the almost imperceptible hum that vibrated just beneath my skin. It was all a prelude, a silent, insistent drumbeat counting down to nightfall. After the kids were asleep and Sarah was engrossed in a new design project, I found myself drawn outside again. It wasn't a conscious decision, more like a current pulling me, a magnetic force I couldn't resist. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and ancient, like old blood. The crickets, usually a symphony of sound, were strangely muted, their chirps sparse and hesitant. I walked slowly, my bare feet cool on the damp grass, towards the overgrown corner of the property. The well stood there, a dark, silent sentinel waiting. The moonlight, filtered through the clouds, gave it a spectral glow, making the rough stones seem to pulse with a faint inner light. I stood a few feet away, my heart a dull thrum against my ribs, listening. At first, there was nothing, just the vast, oppressive silence of the Iowa night. I almost turned to go back inside, to dismiss it all as a trick of the light, a product of my own overactive imagination. But then, it began. Not a whisper, not a murmur, but a sound that seemed to form directly inside my head. It was my name, Alex. It was soft, almost a sigh, but it resonated with an impossible clarity, as if spoken directly into my ear. It wasn't Sarah's voice or my mother's or anyone I knew. It was a voice that was no voice, a sound woven from the very fabric of the silence. It was ancient yet intimately familiar, as if it had always been there, waiting for me to finally hear it. Then came the memories. Not images, but feelings. Fragments of forgotten moments, sensations long buried. The sting of a childhood scraped knee. The warmth of my grandmother's hand. The sharp metallic taste of fear from a near-miss car accident years ago. They weren't random. They were deeply personal. Things I hadn't thought about in decades. Things that had shaped me in subtle ways. The voice seemed to be sifting through them, tasting them, understanding them. You remember, it seemed to say, not in words, but in a resonance that echoed through my very being. You remember the fear, the joy, the loss. An unsettling pull began to emanate from the well. A gentle, insistent tug that felt like a physical current. It wasn't violent, but it was undeniable, drawing me closer, inviting me to lean over the grate, to peer into the absolute darkness below. My feet moved without conscious thought, one step, then another, until I was standing directly over the well, my face inches from the rusted iron. The air here was colder, much colder, and the briny smell was overwhelming, like standing on a forgotten shore. The whispers intensified, no longer just my name, but a chorus of indistinct voices weaving in and out of each other, a symphony of forgotten echoes. They seemed to be speaking to me, about things I had long buried, things I had tried to forget. And a part of me, a dark, curious part, wanted to hear more. It wanted to understand what this ancient thing knew about me, what it wanted, and what it could offer. I stumbled back into the farmhouse, the cold of the well still clinging to my skin, the phantom whispers still echoing in my mind. Sarah was still at her desk, the soft glow of her monitor illuminating her face. She looked up as I entered, a small smile playing on her lips. "Everything all right out there, Night Owl?" she asked, her voice warm and familiar, a stark contrast to the ancient chill I'd just experienced. I tried to speak, but my throat felt tight, as if I'd swallowed a handful of dust. "The well?" I managed, my voice a raspy whisper. It was whispering. Sarah's smile faltered. She tilted her head, a quizzical expression on her face. "Whispering? Alex, are you feeling okay? You look a little pale." She rose from her chair, her brow furrowed with concern, and placed a hand on my forehead. "You're cold. Did you catch a chill out there?" I shook my head, pulling away gently. "No, it's not that. It was the well. I heard it. It was, calling my name. And then it started showing me things. Memories." I knew how it sounded, even as the words left my mouth. It sounded insane, but it was the truth, my truth. Sarah led me to the couch, her movements calm and deliberate. She sat beside me, her hand rubbing soothing circles on my back. "Alex, honey, you've been working so hard. And this farm, it's a big change. Maybe you're just a little overtired. The mind plays tricks on you when you're exhausted and in a new, quiet place." "It wasn't tricks, Sarah," I insisted, my voice rising slightly. "It was real. It knew things about my past, things I haven't thought about in years." I recounted the experience, the faint call of my name, the sudden rush of forgotten sensations, the unsettling pull towards the grate. I tried to convey the profound, ancient quality of the voice, the way it seemed to resonate not just in my ears, but in my very soul. She listened patiently, her gaze unwavering, but I could see the subtle shift in her eyes. The concern was still there, but now it was tinged with something else. A hint of skepticism. A touch of worry that went beyond simple fatigue. When I finished, the silence in the living room was heavy, filled with the unspoken questions hanging between us. "Alex," she said finally, her voice soft, almost hesitant, "I know you believe what you heard, but there's no one else out there. And it's an old well. It's probably just the wind or the way the sound carries in the night. Or maybe you're just a little stressed. This move has been a lot for all of us." Her words, meant to comfort, felt like a wall. A thick, impenetrable wall that separated my experience from hers. I wanted her to understand, to believe me, to share the unsettling wonder and fear that had gripped me. But her rational mind, her grounded nature, couldn't bridge the gap. She saw a tired husband, not a man who had just communed with something ancient and unknowable. I nodded, a hollow feeling spreading through my chest. "Yeah, maybe you're right, just tired." The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. I knew she wasn't right. I knew what I had heard. And in that moment, a subtle, insidious isolation began to creep in. I was alone in this. Alone with the well. Alone with its whispers. And a part of me, a dark, curious part, felt a strange sense of possessiveness over this secret. It was mine. And mine alone. Despite Sarah's gentle dismissal, the well's presence didn't diminish. If anything, it grew stronger, more insistent. The next few nights, I found myself drawn to it again. Not just on the full moon, but on the nights leading up to it, and even on the nights after. The whispers were no longer faint or indistinct. They were clearer, sharper, like a radio signal slowly tuning into focus. And they were speaking directly to me. It started with simple things. The well would hum a forgotten melody from my childhood, a lullaby my mother used to sing, a tune I hadn't consciously thought of in decades. Then it would echo a phrase, a snippet of conversation from a long-ago argument, a word of encouragement from a forgotten mentor. These were things that only I would recognize, things that resonated deep within my own personal history. One evening, as I stood by the well, the air around it thick with its strange, briny scent, the whispers coalesced into a single, resonant voice. It wasn't a human voice, not truly. It was more like the sound of water moving over ancient stone or the deep thrum of the earth itself, but shaped into language. And it spoke of my first pet, a scruffy terrier named Buster, and the exact spot in the old backyard where we'd buried him after he'd been hit by a car. It described the small, smooth stone I'd placed over his grave and the single, withered rose I'd left beside it. Details I hadn't recalled in years, details that brought a sudden, unexpected pang of grief. Another time, it spoke of a secret I'd kept since high school, a small, petty act of betrayal against a friend that had gnawed at my conscience for years. It didn't accuse or condemn. It simply stated the facts, the names, the date, the exact words exchanged. It was as if the well had access to a perfect, unblemished record of my life, every triumph, every failure, every hidden shame. This was deeply unsettling. It was a violation of my privacy, a trespass into the most intimate corners of my mind. Yet, beneath the fear, a dangerous fascination began to bloom. How could it know these things? What was this ancient entity that seemed to possess such an intimate knowledge of my past? It wasn't just echoing my thoughts, it was pulling them from a deeper well, a well of forgotten memories and buried emotions. The whispers weren't always about painful memories. Sometimes, they would remind me of moments of pure joy, the day Lily was born, the feeling of her tiny hand gripping my finger, the pride I felt when Tom hit his first home run, a perfect sunset shared with Sarah on a beach vacation years ago. It was a strange, unsettling intimacy, as if the well was trying to forge a connection, to prove its understanding of my very essence. I found myself spending more and more time by the well, drawn by its impossible knowledge. I would ask it questions, silently at first, then in hushed whispers. "How do you know this? What are you?" The answers never came in direct words, but in a cascade of related memories, a tapestry of sound and feeling that hinted at vast, unimaginable depths of understanding. It was like trying to grasp smoke, but the smoke left an indelible mark on my soul. Sarah's gentle questions about my preoccupation turned into worried glances. The kids, sensing the shift in my demeanor, began to give the well an even wider berth. I was becoming a stranger in my own home, consumed by a secret dialogue with an ancient, unseen entity. The well was no longer just a feature of the landscape. It was becoming the center of my world. And I was falling deeper into its silent, knowing embrace. The well's knowledge of my past was unsettling, but its subtle influence on my present was far more insidious. It didn't issue commands or even direct suggestions. Instead, it would plant ideas, tiny seeds of thought that seemed to sprout organically from my own mind, yet carried the faint, unmistakable resonance of the well's whispers. It started small. I'd be working on a coding problem, stuck on a particularly stubborn bug, and a faint, almost imperceptible hum would emanate from the direction of the well. Suddenly, a solution would crystallize in my mind, a line of code, a logical leap I hadn't considered. It felt like a burst of intuition, a moment of pure clarity. But then, a faint, briny scent would waft through the open window, and I'd remember the well, and a cold knot would form in my stomach. Then came the more personal suggestions. Sarah and I had been discussing a renovation project for the old kitchen. We had different ideas about the layout, a minor disagreement that had lingered for weeks. One evening, as I stood by the well, contemplating the problem, a series of images flashed through my mind: Sarah's face, tired and stressed from work, then a vision of her smiling, truly happy, in a kitchen that perfectly matched her vision. The whispers didn't tell me what to do, but they amplified my desire to make her happy, to alleviate her stress, to concede. The next morning, I approached Sarah, not with a compromise, but with a full embrace of her original idea. Her relief and gratitude were immediate, and I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. But later, a faint rhythmic thump-thump seemed to echo in my ears, a subtle reminder of the well's unseen hand. The well also played on my insecurities. My fear of obsolescence, the very flaw Lena had identified, was a fertile ground for its influence. I'd find myself questioning my skills, my relevance in the fast-paced world of technology. Then, the whispers would offer a subtle counter-narrative. Not direct praise, but a resonance of past triumphs, a reminder of my unique abilities, my meticulous nature, my deep understanding of complex systems. It was a subtle validation, a balm to my anxieties. But it always came with a faint, almost imperceptible chill, a feeling of being understood in a way that was both comforting and terrifying. I started making decisions that, while not overtly harmful, felt subtly off-kilter. I'd choose a longer, more scenic route to town, drawn by an inexplicable urge to pass by a particular old oak tree, only to realize later that the tree stood directly over an underground spring that fed the well. I'd find myself humming old, forgotten tunes, only to realize they were the same melodies the well had whispered to me days before. The influence was so subtle, so woven into the fabric of my own thoughts, that it was almost impossible to detect. It felt like my own intuition, my own desires, my own solutions. But the lingering scent of brine, the faint, rhythmic pulse, the sudden, inexplicable clarity of thought, these were the well's fingerprints. It was shaping me, molding me, not with force, but with a gentle, persistent pressure, like water eroding stone. And I, in my growing fascination, was allowing it. I was becoming a conduit, a vessel for its unseen will, and the line between my thoughts and its whispers was blurring with each passing day. The subtle shifts in my perspective, the sudden bursts of intuition, the uncanny alignment of my thoughts with the well's whispers. It all began to coalesce into a single burning question. What was this well? Its knowledge of my past, its influence on my present felt too profound, too deliberate to be mere coincidence. I needed answers, and the only place to find them, I reasoned, was in the farm's history. I started with online archives, sifting through old property records, census data, and local historical societies. The farm had been in the same family, the Millers, for generations, stretching back to the mid-1800s. They were a quiet, hard-working lot, known for their resilience in the face of harsh Iowa winters and unpredictable harvests. Nothing in the official records hinted at anything out of the ordinary. But the internet, as always, was a rabbit hole of its own. I stumbled upon a local history forum, a dusty corner of the web where old-timers and amateur historians swapped stories and legends. I typed in Miller Farm, Iowa well, and the results were sparse at first, then unsettling. There were hushed mentions, vague allusions to the Miller's folly, or the Whispering Stone. One post, from a user named Prairie Ghost, spoke of a local superstition: never draw water from the old well on a full moon. It'll tell you things you don't want to hear. Another thread discussed a series of unexplained disappearances in the area in the late 1800s, mostly drifters and itinerant farmhands. The official explanation was always left town, but the forum speculated about something darker, something that claimed those who lingered too long. The posts were old, some dating back over a decade, and the language was often hyperbolic, but a cold knot formed in my stomach as I read them. They spoke of a pervasive sense of unease, of shadows that moved when no one was looking, of a silence that was too deep. I decided to visit the local library in town. It was a small, charming building smelling of old paper and polished wood. The librarian, a kindly woman with a severe bun and an even more severe gaze, seemed to know everyone's business. I asked about the Miller farm, specifically about its history and any local legends associated with it. Her eyes, which had been warm and welcoming, suddenly grew distant, almost wary. She pursed her lips, a subtle tightening around her mouth. "The Miller place," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "Been empty for a long time. Good family, the Millers. Kept to themselves." She paused, then added, "They say the land has a memory. Some places, they hold on to things." I pressed her about the well, about any stories of it. She looked away, her gaze drifting towards the dusty shelves filled with local history books. "Old wells," she murmured. "They're like ears, aren't they? Listening to everything. And sometimes they whisper back." She wouldn't elaborate, just shook her head and turned back to her computer, her fingers suddenly busy. The conversation was over. I spent hours poring over old newspaper clippings, local folklore collections, and family histories. I found no concrete evidence, no smoking gun, but a pattern began to emerge. A subtle thread of unease woven through generations of local accounts. Mentions of strange dreams, of sudden changes in personality, of people who simply weren't themselves after spending too much time near the Miller well. It was always vague, always anecdotal, but the sheer consistency of the whispers, the recurring themes of knowledge and influence, sent a shiver down my spine. I left the library with a stack of photocopies and a profound sense of dread. The well wasn't just an old structure, it was a focal point, a nexus of something ancient and powerful. It had been listening for generations, collecting memories, influencing lives. And now, it had found me. The whispers weren't just random echoes, they were a conversation. And I was part of it, whether I wanted to be or not. The farm, our sanctuary, was beginning to feel less like a home and more like a trap. And the well, its silent knowing eye, was at the center of it all. The knowledge I gained from the library, vague and anecdotal as it was, didn't deter me. If anything, it fueled my obsession. The well wasn't just a curiosity anymore, it was a living, breathing entity, a silent partner in a conversation only I could hear. And the more I learned about its past, the more I felt compelled to understand its present. Sarah, however, saw only my growing preoccupation and the subtle, insidious changes it wrought upon our family. Our evenings, once filled with comfortable silence or shared laughter, became strained. I found myself drifting away, my thoughts consumed by the well, even when I was physically present. Sarah would talk about her day, about the kids, about plans for the farm, and I would nod, offer a distracted comment, my mind still replaying the faint rhythmic pulse, the ancient hum. She'd catch my eye, a flicker of hurt in hers, and I'd try to re-engage, but it felt like wading through thick mud. The well, it seemed, was not content with merely influencing my thoughts. It began to subtly exploit the cracks in our foundation, the small insecurities and unspoken resentments that exist in any long-term relationship. It didn't speak ill of Sarah directly, but it would highlight my own frustrations, amplify my anxieties about our financial situation, or subtly remind me of past disagreements. It was like a skilled manipulator, whispering just the right words, at just the right time, to sow seeds of discord. One evening, Sarah mentioned a new client, a demanding one who was pushing her creative boundaries. I felt a surge of pride for her. But then, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper seemed to echo in my mind, a resonance of a thought I'd had weeks ago. She's spending too much time on work, not enough on the family. It wasn't my thought, not truly, but it felt like it. And suddenly, my pride was tinged with a subtle resentment. I found myself making a sharp, uncharacteristic comment about her work-life balance, a comment that hung in the air, thick with unspoken accusation. Sarah's face hardened. "Excuse me? I'm trying to keep us afloat here, Alex. This farm isn't paying for itself." The argument escalated quickly, spiraling out of control over trivial matters, fueled by an underlying tension that felt alien to our relationship. We'd always been good at communicating, at navigating disagreements with respect. But now, it was different. The words felt sharper, the emotions more raw, as if an unseen hand was fanning the flames. I'd catch myself saying things I didn't mean, things that felt like they were being put into my mouth. And in the quiet aftermath of these arguments, when Sarah would retreat to her studio or the kids would hide in their rooms, I'd feel a strange, cold satisfaction. A sense of having asserted something, of having won a battle I didn't even know I was fighting. But then, The faint, briny scent would return, and the rhythmic thump-thump would echo in my ears, and a wave of self-loathing would wash over me. I was losing myself, losing us, and I felt powerless to stop it. Sarah started spending more time with the kids, creating a subtle, almost imperceptible barrier between us. Her laughter with them was genuine, but her smiles at me were strained, her eyes filled with a quiet, growing fear. The farm, our sanctuary, was becoming a battleground, and the well, silent and watchful, was the unseen general orchestrating our unraveling. The tension between Sarah and me grew thicker with each passing day, a suffocating blanket woven from unspoken words and lingering resentments. My arguments, fueled by the well's subtle prodding, left her hurt and confused. She retreated, not just from me, but from the house itself, seeking solace in the garden or long walks with the children. But even there, the farm, our once peaceful sanctuary, began to turn on her. It started subtly, as all things did with the well. Sarah, who had always been a sound sleeper, began to complain of restless nights. She'd wake in a cold sweat, her heart pounding, from dreams she couldn't quite recall, only a lingering sense of dread, a feeling of being watched from the darkness. She'd describe a pervasive chill in the house, even on warm nights, a cold spot that seemed to follow her from room to room, settling on her skin like an icy hand. One morning, she came down to breakfast, her face pale, her eyes shadowed. "I had the strangest dream last night," she murmured, stirring her coffee. "I was in the garden, by the old oak tree, and I could hear, singing, a very old song. It was beautiful, but it made my teeth ache." She shivered despite the warmth of the kitchen. "And then, I felt something touch my hand, something cold and wet. I woke up, and my hand was freezing, like I'd plunged it into ice water. I felt a prickle of unease. The well. It was reaching out. But I said nothing, just nodded, trying to appear sympathetic, but inside, a strange sense of validation bloomed. She was finally seeing it, feeling it. Her skepticism, once a solid wall, began to crack. She still didn't speak of whispers, not directly, but her language shifted. She'd talk about the feeling of the well, the way it seemed to draw the light from the air around it. She started avoiding that corner of the property altogether, her steps quickening when she had to pass the barn. The children, sensing her growing fear, became even more wary, clinging to her skirts when she ventured outside. One afternoon, I found her standing by the kitchen window, staring out at the well, her back to me. Her shoulders were hunched, and she was clutching a mug of tea so tightly her knuckles were white. It's always there, isn't it?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Even when you're not looking, you can feel it, watching." I walked up behind her and placed my hands on her shoulders. She flinched, a small, involuntary gasp escaping her lips. "It's just an old well, Sarah," I said, the words feeling hollow even to my own ears. "It's nothing." She turned, her eyes wide and filled with a raw, unadulterated fear I hadn't seen in them before. "No, Alex," she said, her voice trembling. "It's not nothing, it's alive. And it's listening. I can feel it. It's in the house. It's in my dreams. It's everywhere." Her words were a chilling echo of my own initial fears. But now, hearing them from her, they felt like a confirmation. The well was no longer just my secret. It was becoming our shared nightmare. And the subtle, insidious influence it had exerted on me was now reaching out, touching the ones I loved, pulling them into its cold, ancient embrace. The isolation I had felt was slowly dissolving, replaced by a terrifying, shared reality. The well was no longer content with just me. It wanted us all. Sarah's fear, raw and undeniable, was a mirror reflecting my own. The well was no longer a silent, distant presence. It was actively engaging with us, weaving itself into the fabric of our lives, twisting our perceptions, and now directly influencing Sarah. The arguments, the cold spots, the nightmares, they were all part of its insidious design. Yet even as fear gnawed at me, a strange, dark hope began to bloom. The well, this ancient knowing entity, had power. And perhaps it could offer more than just dread. The whispers, which had previously focused on my past, now shifted. They began to speak of possibilities, of futures. They didn't offer direct commands, but rather, they painted vivid, compelling scenarios, subtly suggesting paths to their realization. It was like a skilled negotiator, sensing my deepest desires, my most gnawing regrets, and offering a way out. My biggest regret, the one that had haunted me for years, was the failure of my first startup. Years of my life, all my savings, poured into a dream that had crumbled, leaving me with a mountain of debt and a crushing sense of inadequacy. The whispers, when they touched on this, were not accusatory. Instead, they presented a vision, a new idea, a revolutionary algorithm, a path to success that was so clear, so elegant, it felt like a divine revelation. It wasn't just a concept, it was a fully formed solution, complete with lines of code, architectural diagrams, and a clear market strategy. It was everything I had ever dreamed of, laid out before me, perfect and attainable. The well seemed to hum with a quiet, knowing satisfaction, as if to say, "This is what I can give you. This is what you deserve." The temptation was immense, a siren song promising redemption. Then there was Sarah. Her exhaustion, her fading spark, the quiet sadness in her eyes. I blamed myself for bringing her to this isolated place, for uprooting our lives. The well, sensing this guilt, began to whisper of her happiness. It showed me images of her, vibrant and joyful, her art celebrated, her dreams realized. It suggested subtle ways to influence her clients, to guide her creative process, to ensure her success. It was a promise of a life free from stress, a life where her talent would finally be recognized, a life where she would be truly content. The whispers were so gentle, so persuasive, that they felt like my own deepest desires, amplified and made real. Even for the children, the well offered its dark gifts. Lily, who sometimes struggled with shyness, was shown as confident, outgoing, effortlessly making friends. Tom, with his quiet intensity, was depicted as a brilliant scholar, his scientific curiosity leading to groundbreaking discoveries. The whispers didn't suggest anything overtly harmful, just subtle nudges, small advantages, a path to their fullest potential. It was the ultimate parental temptation, the promise of a perfect future for my children, free from struggle or disappointment. The well wasn't demanding anything in return, not yet. It was simply offering, laying out a banquet of my deepest desires, my most fervent hopes. It was a master of temptation, understanding that the most powerful influence isn't through force, but through the promise of fulfillment. I found myself spending hours by the well, not just listening, but actively engaging, mentally exploring the possibilities it presented. The line between my own aspirations and the well's insidious suggestions blurred completely. I was no longer just hearing whispers, I was dreaming with it. And the dreams were intoxicating. The farm, once a place of quiet dread, was transforming into a crucible of dark opportunity. And I, Alex, was ready to forge my new reality within its depths. The well's promises, shimmering and seductive, had woven themselves into the very fabric of my thoughts. The fear that had once gripped me was now a distant echo, replaced by a fervent belief in the well's power, a conviction that it held the key to everything I desired. Sarah's worried glances, the children's hushed whispers, they were just distractions, static in the signal. I needed to understand the well, to control it, to harness its ancient wisdom for our benefit. I began spending almost all my waking hours near it. My coding projects, once a source of quiet satisfaction, now felt trivial, mundane. The garden, once a place of peaceful labor, seemed dull. The only true work, the only real purpose, was the well. I'd sit for hours, sometimes just watching it, sometimes whispering questions into the grate, sometimes simply listening to the faint, rhythmic pulse that had become the soundtrack of my life. The briny scent was no longer unsettling, it was intoxicating, a perfume of power. My attempts to understand it started with observation. I'd meticulously record the times the whispers were strongest, the phases of the moon, the atmospheric pressure. I'd drop small objects down the shaft, listening for the splash, trying to gauge its depth. But the sound was always swallowed by an impossible silence. It was as if the well had no bottom, or its depths were so vast that sound simply ceased to exist within them. Then came the attempts to control it. I tried to communicate more directly, using a small, sensitive microphone, hoping to capture the whispers, to analyze their frequency, their patterns. But the microphone would only pick up static, or a deafening roar that made my ears ache. It was as if the well resisted direct capture, preferring its subtle, insidious method of communication. One afternoon, driven by a sudden, desperate urge to prove its physical reality, I decided to try and seal it. I gathered heavy stones from the field, large, jagged rocks that took all my strength to lift. I planned to pile them over the grate, to silence the whispers, to reclaim my sanity. Sarah found me, sweating and grunting, struggling with a particularly large boulder. Her face was a mask of concern. "Alex, what are you doing? You'll hurt yourself." "I'm going to seal it," I grunted, my voice hoarse. "Stop it. Make it stop." She tried to dissuade me, but I was beyond reason. I pushed the first boulder onto the grate. It landed with a dull thud, a sound of finality. I felt a surge of triumph. But then, a low rumble emanated from beneath the well, a sound that vibrated through the earth, shaking the ground beneath my feet. The stones I had just placed began to shift, slowly at first, then with increasing speed, until they tumbled off the grate, scattering around the well with a deafening crash. The air around the well grew cold, and the briny scent intensified, sharp and acrid, like a warning. I stood there panting, covered in dust, staring at the well. It was unchanged, its grate still open to the darkness, its silence more profound than ever. But I felt its power, a raw, untamed force that had effortlessly shrugged off my pathetic attempt to contain it. My desperation turned to a strange, almost reverent awe. It wasn't just a well, it was a living, breathing entity, ancient and powerful, and it had just shown me its true strength. My attempts to control it had only served to increase its power, to deepen its hold. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I was no longer trying to seal it. I was trying to appease it, and it was listening. My failed attempt to seal the well had been a turning point. It was no longer a game, no longer a subtle dance of influence. The well had asserted itself, and in doing so, had shed its veil of ambiguity. The whispers, which had once been a jumble of indistinct sounds, now coalesced into a coherent, terrifying voice. It was not a voice I recognized, yet it resonated with an impossible familiarity, as if it had always been there, buried deep within the earth, waiting for the right moment to speak. It spoke not in words, but in concepts, in pure, unfiltered understanding that bypassed my ears and settled directly into my mind. It was the voice of immense age, of something that had witnessed the slow crawl of geological time, the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth and death of stars. It was the sound of the Earth's memory, vast and indifferent, yet now focused entirely on me. It revealed its true nature, not as a spirit or a ghost or a simple haunting. It was a parasite. An ancient, intelligent entity that fed on human emotion and memory. It had lain dormant for millennia, a seed buried deep within the earth, waiting for the right conditions to awaken. And those conditions were us. Our hopes, our fears, our regrets, our dreams. They were its sustenance. Our lives, our very consciousness, were its feast. It showed me visions, not through my eyes, but directly into my mind. I saw glimpses of its past, of other families, other lives, drawn to this same spot, lured by its subtle promises, consumed by its insatiable hunger. I saw their joy, their sorrow, their love, their hate, all distilled into pure energy, absorbed by the well, adding to its vast, ancient consciousness. They were not victims, not truly. They were offerings, fuel. It showed me how it worked, how it would subtly influence, gently nudge, slowly erode the boundaries between self and other, between reality and illusion. It would find the cracks, the vulnerabilities, the unspoken desires, and it would exploit them, not with malice, but with the cold, efficient precision of a predator. It didn't hate, it simply consumed. It didn't judge, it simply was. And then, it showed me its current feast, my family. Sarah's fading spark, her growing fear, her desperate attempts to hold on to normalcy. It was all a delicious banquet for the well. Lily's innocent joy, Tom's burgeoning curiosity, they were pure, potent energy waiting to be harvested. The arguments, the tension, the growing distance between us. It was all part of the process. A slow, deliberate unraveling designed to maximize the yield. The voice, now clear and resonant in my mind, was not threatening. It was simply stating facts, an ancient, indifferent truth. It was the voice of a farmer explaining the harvest, a shepherd counting his flock. And I was part of the flock. We all were. The farm, our sanctuary, was nothing more than a carefully cultivated field, and we were the crop. I stood there, rooted to the spot, the full horror of its revelation washing over me. My mind reeled, struggling to comprehend the scale of its existence, the depth of its deception. The well wasn't just whispering. It was singing a song of consumption, a lullaby of oblivion. And I, Alex, had been dancing to its tune, willingly, unknowingly, leading my family to its maw. The promises, the solutions, the dreams, they were all just bait. And we had swallowed it whole. The ancient voice, now a constant presence in my mind, was not just speaking to me, it was becoming me. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the harvest was about to begin. The well's voice, now a constant, resonant presence in my mind, no longer bothered with subtlety. The illusions of choice, the gentle nudges, the seductive promises, they were gone, replaced by a stark, terrifying clarity. It had shown me its nature, its purpose, and now it was time for the harvest. And the first fruit it desired was Lily. It didn't speak her name, not in words. But the image of her, small and vulnerable, playing by the old oak tree, filled my mind. It was a vision of pure, innocent joy, a vibrant splash of color against the encroaching darkness. And then, the image shifted. Lily, alone, wandering towards the well, drawn by an unseen force, her small hand reaching for the rusted grate. The well's hum intensified, a low, hungry growl that vibrated through my very bones. She is pure, the voice resonated in my mind, a thought that was both mine and not mine. Untouched. A perfect vessel. A new beginning. It was offering me a choice, but it was no choice at all. Protect her, or let her be consumed. But the protection it offered came with a price, a terrible, unspeakable price. It showed me the scenario, not in words, but in a series of chilling, undeniable sensations. The farm, our sanctuary, was a cage. The well was the lock, and the key was a sacrifice. Not of life, not directly, but of essence. A transfer, a replacement. It wanted a part of me, the part that still clung to my humanity, to my memories, to my very identity. It wanted to shed its ancient, decaying form and inhabit a new one. And it wanted me to facilitate it. I saw myself standing by the well, my hands outstretched, a conduit. I saw Lily, safe, playing in the sun, oblivious. And I saw the well, its darkness swirling, its hum a triumphant roar. It was a bargain with the devil. But the devil was offering salvation, a twisted, horrifying salvation for my child. The alternative was unthinkable. The image of Lily, lost to the well's depths, was a torment I could not bear. The well's voice, now a seductive whisper, began to paint a different picture. Imagine, it resonated, a life free from fear, free from regret. A life where your children are safe, always, where their dreams are realized, their potential limitless. All you have to do is let me in. Let me guide you. Let me become you. My mind reeled, caught between the terrifying reality of its demand and the intoxicating promise of its offer. The fear for Lily was a sharp, agonizing pain, driving me towards the abyss. Sarah's face, etched with worry, flashed in my mind. Tom, with his quiet intensity, his burgeoning curiosity. They were all vulnerable, and I was the only one who could save them, or condemn them. The well's hum grew louder, a relentless pressure in my skull. It was demanding an answer, a decision. The air around me grew heavy, thick with the scent of brine and something else, something metallic and ancient, like the taste of blood. I felt a cold, unseen hand on my shoulder, guiding me, urging me towards the well. The choice was clear, yet impossible. Sacrifice myself or lose everything. The well had laid its cards on the table, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I was about to play my hand. I lay on the damp earth, gasping, my body racked with tremors. The well's hum, though diminished, still vibrated in my bones, a phantom limb of its immense presence. I had fought, I had resisted, and I had, against all odds, broken free from its immediate grasp. But the victory felt hollow, a mere reprieve. It had claimed something. I could feel the void, a cold, empty space where a part of me used to be. It wasn't a physical wound, no blood, no broken bones. It was deeper, more insidious. The well had taken my hope. The vibrant, almost naive belief in a fresh start, in a sanctuary where we could rebuild our lives, it was gone. Replaced by a chilling certainty that this farm, this land, was tainted. It was a prison, a monument to what was lost, a place we could never truly escape. My mind, once sharp and analytical, felt fractured. The lines between reality and the well's insidious whispers had blurred beyond recognition. I found myself questioning everything: Sarah's love, the children's innocence, my own sanity. Was it real? Or was it just another one of the well's manipulations, a final cruel twist of the knife? The paranoia was a constant companion, a cold hand gripping my heart, whispering doubts into my ear. I dragged myself back to the farmhouse, the journey feeling impossibly long, each step a testament to the weight of what I had endured. Sarah met me at the door, her face etched with a mixture of fear and relief. She saw the change in me, the haunted look in my eyes, the way my hands trembled even when I tried to hold them still. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. The well's influence, its chilling presence, was now undeniable, a palpable force in our home. The family unity, once our greatest strength, had fractured. The children, sensing the profound shift in their parents, became withdrawn, their laughter replaced by a quiet, watchful silence. Lily, who had once loved to explore, now clung to Sarah's side, her eyes wide with an unspoken fear. Tom, usually so boisterous, was withdrawn, his headphones a permanent fixture, a desperate attempt to drown out the unseen horrors that now permeated our home. Our hope for a normal life, for the quiet, peaceful existence we had craved, was gone. It had been replaced by a constant gnawing dread, a feeling of being perpetually watched, perpetually hunted. The farm, our dream, had become our nightmare. We were trapped, not by physical chains, but by the invisible tendrils of an ancient malevolent entity that had claimed its price. And the price was us. Our peace, our sanity, our very essence. The well had taken its toll, leaving an indelible mark, a permanent scar on our souls. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was just the beginning of its claim. The days that followed my confrontation with the well were a blur of exhaustion and a pervasive, bone-deep dread. My body moved, performed the necessary tasks of farm life, but my mind felt detached, observing from a distance. The well's presence was a constant low thrum beneath the surface of everything, a phantom limb of terror that never quite faded. We didn't speak of it, not directly. The words felt too small, too inadequate to describe the enormity of what had happened, what had been taken. Sarah, in her quiet way, tried to mend the fractures. She'd bring me coffee in the mornings, her touch gentle, her eyes filled with a sorrow that mirrored my own. She tried to engage the children in their old games, but their laughter was brittle, easily broken. Lily, who had once loved to explore, now moved with a hesitant caution, her gaze constantly darting towards the windows, as if expecting something to emerge from the fields. Tom, usually so boisterous, was withdrawn, his headphones a shield against the unseen horrors that now permeated our home. The farm itself felt different. The vast open fields, once a symbol of freedom, now seemed to stretch endlessly, a desolate expanse that offered no escape. The old farmhouse, which we had poured our hopes and dreams into, felt like a cage. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside, was amplified, twisted into something sinister. The silence, once comforting, was now heavy, pregnant with unspoken threats. It was a silence that listened, a silence that waited. We had tried to seal the well, not with stones this time, but with a thick reinforced concrete slab poured directly over the grate. It was a futile gesture, a desperate act of defiance against an entity that operated beyond the physical. We knew it wouldn't stop it, not truly, but it was something. A symbolic act of resistance, a way to reclaim a tiny sliver of control. The concrete was cold, hard, and silent. But beneath it, I could still feel the faint rhythmic pulse, a heartbeat from the deep, mocking our efforts. The barn, once a place of rustic charm, now loomed, a dark skeletal silhouette against the bruised sky. The overgrown corner of the property, where the well lay buried, was a forbidden zone, a place we instinctively avoided. The children would skirt wide around it, their small hands clutching ours, their eyes wide with an unspoken understanding. It was a monument to what was lost, a constant chilling reminder of the price we had paid for our fresh start. We were still here. We hadn't fled. Part of it was the sheer exhaustion, the inability to even contemplate another move, another upheaval. But a deeper, more insidious reason held us. The well had claimed a part of us, and in doing so, it had tethered us to this land. The farm was no longer just a property. It was a part of our story, a chapter written in fear and loss. And we, the Thorne family, were now inextricably bound to its scarred landscape, living in the shadow of its unending hunger. The sanctuary had become a prison, and the whispers, though muted, were a constant, insidious reminder that we were not alone. Not anymore. It's been a year since we poured the concrete, a year since the well claimed its price. Life, in its relentless way, has found a new normal. The children, resilient as only children can be, have slowly begun to reclaim their laughter, though a shadow lingers in their eyes, a wariness that wasn't there before. Sarah, my strong, beautiful Sarah, has found a fragile peace, her art a desperate anchor in the swirling currents of our new reality. We talk sometimes about leaving, about selling the farm, cutting our losses, and finding a new beginning somewhere else. But the words feel hollow, a performance for a future we no longer believe in. Because the well is still here, and so am I. And so are its whispers. They are not as loud as they once were, not as insistent. The concrete slab, a monument to our futile defiance, seems to muffle them, to contain their immediate power. But they are there. A faint, almost subliminal hum, a low-frequency vibration that resonates not in my ears, but in the very core of my being. It's a constant companion, a silent partner in my thoughts, a chilling echo of the vast ancient intelligence that lies buried beneath our feet. It's worse on the full moon. The night sky, once a source of wonder, is now a canvas for my dread. The moon, when it hangs full and luminous, seems to amplify the whispers, turning them into a soft, rhythmic pulse that vibrates through the floorboards, up the walls, and into my skull. Thump, 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 thump. It's the heartbeat of the abyss, a reminder of the entity's unending hunger, its patient, insidious watch. I've tried everything to escape it. I've buried myself in work, coding until my eyes burn, my mind numb with logic. I've walked for miles across the field, seeking the solace of the vast, empty landscape, but the whispers follow, a phantom breeze on my neck. I've even tried to drown them out, with music, with noise, with the comforting banality of television, but they always find their way in, weaving themselves into the fabric of my thoughts, twisting my perceptions, subtly shifting my reality. They don't offer promises anymore, not directly. The seduction is gone, replaced by a cold, knowing certainty. They simply are. They remind me of what was lost, of the part of me that was claimed. They remind me of the faces I saw in the well's depths, the endless chorus of the absorbed. And they remind me that I am still here, still listening, still waiting. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the quiet of the night, I find myself drawn to the window, staring out at the dark, silent fields. I know the well is out there, a black eye staring back at the moon, and I wonder what it's thinking, what it's planning, what new knowledge it has absorbed, what new desires it has cultivated. I wonder if it's still growing, still expanding, still reaching out with its invisible tendrils, searching for new connections, new acquisitions. The farm is no longer a home. It's a monument, a living scar on the landscape, a testament to a battle fought and lost. We are tethered here, bound by an unseen force, living in the shadow of an ancient, insatiable hunger. The whispers are a constant, insidious reminder that we are not free. We are merely waiting. And the well, its silent, knowing eye, is always watching, always listening, always whispering. And I, Alex, am always, always hearing it, forever.